Welcome to the Pursuit of Learning podcast. I'm your host, Clint Murphy. My goal is for each of us to grow personally, professionally, and financially, one conversation at a time. To do that, we will have conversations with subject matter experts across a variety of modalities. My job as your host will be to dig out those golden nuggets of wisdom that will facilitate our growth. Join me on this pursuit. If I asked you what mindfulness and money have in common, you may be hard-pressed to come up with an answer. But in reality, mindfulness is very important in helping us achieve our financial goals. And today I talked with Jonathan DeYoe about how mindfulness can help us achieve financial independence aligned with our purpose. We share how money is a tool you can use to support your lifestyle, reach your goals, and earn the happiness dividend you deserve. Enjoy the show. Jonathan, welcome to the Pursuit of Learning podcast. Where I'd love to start with you is what's motivating you in life right now? And what are 2 or 3 things you want to make sure we get across to the listeners in today's show?
Wow, what's motivating me right now? It's a tough one, actually. I'm kind of digging out of a big hole from last year. So I'm highly motivated to get my regular daily habits back to where they were, 13 months ago. And things we want to get out of it today is what's the benefit of pursuing learning, right? What are some of the things that mindfulness teaches us? How does mindfulness fit in with money? What are some of the resources that are available out there? And just have a conversation about intellectual upward mobility.
I love it. And we'll be spending a lot of our time talking about your book, Mindful Money. So we'll cover off a lot of that in our conversation together. And Jonathan, was the last year, was some of that COVID and just working your way through it and falling in and out of routine that you're trying to get back into now?
Not COVID. Really. I mean, COVID was a pain in everyone's butt for sure. But my brother died June 17th, 2021. He's my little brother. It was an accident. It was a surprise to all of us. He drowned in the Pacific Ocean with his family watching, and it was awful. And, my life will never be the same. Like there isn't a good path to, getting over that. And so the first thing that happened when he died was, 3-4 weeks of just total misery and meltdown. And then I tried to sit again, tried to meditate, tried to work out, and I really couldn't do anything besides walk. And so I just ended up walking in Tilden Park I'm in Berkeley, California. So Tilden Park is in my backyard, and I just spent hours and hours and hours and hours walking in Tilden Park. My routine involves getting up really early. So I still got up really early. I would just go into Tilden Park in the dark and just yell, scream in the park, basically, when there's just dead silence all around, and, ask why, and how could it happen to me, and how could it happen to him, and why us, and all that kind of stuff. So a lot of coming out from that.
Yeah. Sorry for your loss. Is there, with the listeners, is there a particular memory of your brother that when you think of it, brings a little bit of light to your mind and helps ease that you'd love to share and keep his memory alive?
There's actually one memory I go back to. I'm going to have a hard time telling the whole thing, but there's a memory I go back to on a regular basis. So he died at the tail end of COVID. The only people that only person I really stayed in touch with through COVID, physically seeing, was him. And so the first 3-4 months of lockdown, we didn't see each other, but we talked. And then we said, you know what, we could go outside, and we play soccer, so we could keep our distance and just kick a ball back and forth. And so for about a year and a half during COVID and during lockdowns, we would go to this park that's halfway between his house and my house, and we would just kick a ball back and forth. And sometimes we'd bring the kids, and sometimes we would leave the kids, but we'd just basically kick this ball back and forth. And then 3 weeks before he died, so we kept our distance. We were good citizens. We wore our masks. We kept our distance. And then 3 weeks before he died, things were starting to open up. And I said, as we were leaving the parking lot, I said, hey, you know what? How about a hug? And so after a pretty difficult time, I got a hug. We both got a hug. And 3 weeks later, he was gone.
It's a beautiful moment to share with us, and that you were able to appreciate with him. When it comes to mindfulness and what you write about mindfulness and money, Was he a part of that journey with you? And was that something that you shared together?
Yeah. We had really big plans. And this goes back. We actually started a company. So I'm in financial planning. I've been a financial advisor for 25 years. I spent 5 years on Wall Street before, a bunch of different firms before I started my own company in 2001. The struggle that I've had my entire career is all of Wall Street, my whole peer group. We're always moving up market. We're always trying to help people that have more money, more money, more money, more money. And so there's people like my parents would come and say, hey, could you help us out? And I'd have to say, you know what, my minimum is X, or my minimum is XYZ, or what have you. So I would just give them like an hour of my time and we'd have a conversation. I'd suggest some resources and they would go on about and do their own thing. So in 2004, 2005, Dave and I started a company together called Workers Financial. We each had a 1-year-old. 2 years later, we had not met enough, not figured out the path enough. And we each had 4-year-olds and another 1-year-old. And so we mothballed it in 2007, 2008. And we said, hey, we'll come back to this. We kept talking. We kept trying to figure it out. And in 2018, I had a conversation. I started realizing that I couldn't grow anymore and be the CEO or I had to figure out tech stack and I had to figure out operations and HR. And I couldn't handle all those roles and be the advisor. And, we got a team of 7 or 8, but I just couldn't do my role. It was too big. I said, hey, Dave, one of two things is going to happen. Either I'm going to tuck into a larger firm, or you're going to come in and you're going to be the CEO and you're going to run things. You're going to do all the operations. You're going to run HR. You're going to, deal with payroll, all that kind of stuff. And I'll deal with advice. And then we'll be able to go back to that Workers Financial thing, be able to scale up something that would also help people like our parents and, advise, broaden and deepen advice for, the 90%, the people that don't have access to really good advice. And, at the same time, I was talking to other larger firms. And so he said, you know what, let's do it. He said, Jonathan, the thing that I have to wait for is my last stock vests in March of 21. So I said, okay, let's start putting everything together, March of 21. And then we'll start, you'll start at the firm, January of 22. I was 6 months too late. But in 2019, he helped me get my financial education courses built. He helped me find a firm in France that would help us market those courses. So he helped me start building the infrastructure that we could use to provide three different levels of services, right? We've got the DIY support. We've got education and financial planning support that people can use on their own. We've got the sort of done with you. So we've got the group support. And we've got kind of the done for you, which is like the wealth management, the traditional thing that I've always done. But he helped me get it started, helped me connect me with some people that knew what they were doing in terms of marketing and in terms of getting those out there and in the world of technology and social media. But man, we could have done so much together. He was, he's an MBA from Cal, just the smartest guy I've ever met in my life. Stoic as can be. He could deal with any kind of adversity. He could figure something out. And I always bump my head up against this technology wall. How do you get the word out so that you have a lot of people that can receive it? You don't need a lot of compensation if you have a lot of people you're dealing with. In the financial advisory world, you can only serve maybe 150 clients. That's it. If you want to reach more people, help more people, there isn't a way to do it in the advisory world. You can't do one-to-one services that way. But he knew how to build that. And so I could have done a lot more. Now it's writing and podcasting and some video on YouTube and those kind of things that I'm doing. And I have reach and I got lots of people to follow and listen, and it's great. I love it. It's not the same as it would have been doing it side by side with my bro.
Oh, absolutely. And we could have a whole other episode and conversation together on how to do that. Jonathan, for me, as I approach what I call retirement, that's the direction I intend to go. Now, it won't be financial planning, but it'll be a lot of similar things. And then I look at it and, I wrote down what you said, the DIY, done with you, done for you. That's a lot of what I intend to be focusing on as well. And so as I've built the podcast and built my Twitter, I've explored how to do that. So that's, you and I can have a whole other conversation on that, and I can give you some thoughts and ideas if you're up for it. You can probably tell I get lit up just at the idea of that. Now, but that's not the convo for today. Where did mindfulness come into this? Your brother, you said, was stoic. And from what I read, your path was the Buddhist path. So where did that come in for you?
So actually, the gentleman's name was Marvin Shaw. I started my undergrad program in finance. If you asked any of my friends in high school or growing up, they would say, Jonathan's going to do something with money. He's going to be a venture capitalist or a financial advisor or something like that. That's definitely Jonathan's path. And, I started out that way. I started off in finance in college, and I just got bored. And so I had a couple professors. I was taking a sort of a survey class in comparative religion, and I was taking a philosophy class. And Jim Allard was my primary philosophy instructor, and Marvin Shaw was my comparative religion instructor. And they both said, "Hey, Jonathan, I graduated with a degree in philosophy and religious studies." And they said, "Hey, Jonathan, you should probably go on and study this further." I don't know if I was, if they were caressing my ego, or if they, if they thought, "Hey, this guy's got some thoughts," or what the deal was. But I ended up going to grad school, and I came out to the Graduate Theological Union in Berkeley, California, and it's made up of, I think at the time it was 8 seminaries, 1 Jewish school, and 1 Buddhist school. And I came out originally to study, to be a Lutheran seminarian. And so I had a scholarship to go to the Lutheran seminary. And when I got out here, they were like, I don't know if it was a bad year or what, but we don't have the money for your scholarship. And so they said, there's 9 other schools. Go talk to those schools. Maybe someone else has some scholarship funds available. So I went door to door. First, I started out with Presbyterian. I went to, a couple other Christian schools, and then I went to the Buddhist school. And the Buddhist school said, "Yeah, we've got some funds." So I was like, "Great, I'm going to study comparative religion from the Buddhist side." And it took me probably, 3 months to fall in love with it, and decide that I was going to practice Buddhism and I was going to pursue this. And I spent 3 years in the academic study in Buddhism, which I know a ton about Buddhism. And about the practice of Buddhism and the philosophy and the Abhidharma and all the stuff about Buddhism. I went deep, but my practice didn't take hold until towards the end. And when my practice started taking hold, I decided I wanted to practice more than I wanted to study. So I actually dropped out of a program in Buddhist studies and with a degree in philosophy in the late 90s. And so I'm like, what? There's no job for that. So I went to Dean Witter, and they hired me as a salesperson, and that's where the finance thing came in. But I had this grounding in Buddhist studies and mindfulness, and I've carried that since that day.
And what I really appreciated as I read your book is you were able to take a lot of the concepts from Buddhism and say, how does this apply to money? And so that's what you and I are going to dive in together. And the first thing you talk about is 4 basic things that we need to understand with Buddhism, with mindful money, is we need to understand our money illusions, understand what makes us happy, make a plan to achieve what makes us happy, and then stick to the plan. What I always love in life is when things are simple. Now, simple is never easy, which is why there's a whole book on how to do the 4 things. Do you want to take us into that 4 steps, high level, and then we'll dive into some of the details together?
I love it. I've never had anyone summarize the book that perfectly, but that is literally the 4 things. That is exactly what needs to happen. In Buddhism, like when you sit, the point is to notice when you're distracted, right? That's what mindfulness practice is. That's really the foundation of all meditation. It's not, there's this belief out there, I'm supposed to not think. No. You're supposed to think. You can't not think. You're human. You have a brain. You're going to think. The brain secretes thoughts in the same way that the glands secrete saliva, right? You can't stop it, but you can note it. And when you note it, you'll note that it comes, it sticks, and it leaves, right? So when you're in finance, when you're thinking about investing or thinking about your money, the first thing is there's a lot of distraction. There are bad lessons we learn as kids. There is nothing practical taught in our school systems. Our parents really don't know what they're doing. And we're learning lessons, as our parents and grandparents tell stories, at their knee as we're children. We're learning lessons before we even understand we're learning lessons. And then we go forward into life and we graduate from college and somebody gives us a 401k and they say, okay, choose your insurance before, in the open window in November and good luck to you. But you have no idea what to do with all. And meanwhile, media is going crazy. You have these internal fears and concerns and fear and greed and not knowing. That's the collations in Buddhist studies is, we're all afraid. What is it that I want to have happen? What is it I don't want to have happen? What is it that I don't understand that's happening, right? These are the three collations. And in finance, it's everywhere. Like everywhere you turn, someone has a story. And these stories all accumulate to create these illusions, these beliefs about money that just aren't true. And so the first step is really understanding, you can name the beliefs. We can go through, my book suggests there's 8. I've seen lists of 9 and 10 and 7 and whatever. It doesn't matter. They all overlap. But there's some key things that are really important to understand that once understood, frees you, just like meditation frees you from your discursive thoughts. Knowing this frees you from these misbeliefs, from these mistaken beliefs, from these illusions. Then, once you know that, you have to, so what's the point of it all? Like, what's the purpose? And that's where you find these sources of happiness. And there's a ton of research on this. And this isn't, I didn't do original research here. There's so many people, Dan Harris, Brene Brown, to talk about these are the things that really make us happy. And again, in the book, I have 8 things. There's a lot of science to it. My list of 8 is not scientific. I combined a couple, I separated a couple. The only thing that I add to that literature that I think is probably, it's not unique, but it's more unique, that's accountability. So I think it's really important to be accountable to yourself and to have somebody remind you, maybe you don't want to do that, or help you remain accountable to yourself. So the one thing I add in that space is accountability, I think. And then once you know the foundation of the things that are going to make you happy, and it's really specific. This is not 8 things that equally apply to everybody. Like every single person will have their different percentage weighting on each of these 8 things. And somebody may throw in a 9th thing. That's fine. But once you know what's really, really important to you, that becomes the very beginning of your financial plan. That becomes the very beginning of, these are the behaviors I need to put in place to get the things that are important to me done, right? And then once the plan's in place, the key is to not get shaken by the illusions. Once the plan's in place, you don't have to do other things. And so this is one of my struggles actually with the industry. The industry focuses so much on prognostication, on market timing, investment selection. Nobody has any clue in this space. I mean, nobody can predict, and there's so much research on this, but that's where everybody makes suggestions as advisors. But if you don't do planning and you're not helping people understand what's important to them, you're not adding any value as an advisor. So really, the simple portfolio is the best portfolio and the one you just stick with. You're not trying to guess if Bitcoin's going to win or not. You're not trying to guess if it's Pepsi or Coke. You're not trying to guess if it's Ford or Tesla. You don't have to know that. You don't have to guess that. No one has to know that. You own it all. And you just patiently wait for things to zig and zag around their upward trajectory. I mean, it's pretty basic, but it works.
And so and we're going to work our way through all of it. I love it at a high level. Let's go back to the illusions, right? So when you look at that, we talk about the fact, and you just nailed it, from our childhood, our teens, our school, right? Most of us organize our lives around money. Whether it's earning it, worrying about it, spending it, but we don't know much about money. There's not much education. I write about it a fair amount. Most people don't seem to necessarily understand how it works. So when it comes to family illusions, cultural media, or Wall Street, what are some of the things we should be looking for that are distracting us from what really matters? And what really jumps out at me at that is, what are the questions we should be asking ourselves to uncover our illusions?
So I'm actually writing about this again right now. So there's 3 broad categories of things to be aware of, and we'll work this into questions you can ask. But the 3 broad categories are physiology, psychology, and culture. So what do I mean by these 3 things? So we are physiologically poorly designed to make good finance decisions. Why is that? Well, you got to imagine 50,000, 100,000 years ago, maybe it's 1,000,000 years ago, right? We are on the African savannah, and a buddy and I, this is many, many, many years ago, generations ago, a buddy and I are walking on the African savannah, and we hear a stick snap in the bushes. I bolted. I was the first one to go. I ran so fast. I got away. My friend went, I wonder what that sound is. And he got eaten by the saber-toothed tiger, right? So generation upon generation upon generation of humans have been naturally selected to be defensive, hyper-aware defensive mechanisms. And so we are aware of things and we are inventing things that are terrifying and scary. And so we spend a lot of time on our heads, which is one of the reasons mindfulness is important here. We spend a lot of time on our heads, thinking about wrongs of the past and about potential negatives of the future. And so when you mix that with headlines, we are very ill prepared to note that this too shall pass, when most things do pass in the financial world. The movement of your child's 529 plan is not the same thing as the saber-toothed tiger in the brush, right? It goes up and down. It's what it does. That's how markets work. It's a normal process. The saber-tooth is also a normal process, but we don't have to fear the one the same way we fear the other. But the brain processes those things the same way. So physiologically, we are built to react and to be negative and to, seek out these things that are going to scare us and find them and point them out and run the other way. And in the financial world, that's bad. The second piece is psychologically, and there are hundreds of cognitive and emotional biases that have been identified. Probably the most important of which was identified by Kahneman and Tversky. It's called it's like negativity bias. It's prospect theory. It's the idea that a bad thing hurts us twice as badly as a good thing of the same volume helps us or makes us feel, right? So the negative hurts twice as bad as the positive feels good at the same extremes.
That one tends to lead to loss aversion.
Right. That's prospect theory is the source of loss aversion. Yeah.
Does it not? Loss aversion theory?
Yeah, it's the same thing. Yep. Prospect theory is this psychology, and then Kahneman, wins the Nobel Prize, and it becomes loss aversion. But yeah, there's hundreds of these, and I don't chronicle all these in the book, but there's many, 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 and being aware of them. And this is really exciting for me, and this is, I think, one of the insights that's really important. Kahneman was asked, you got all these biases, you tell us about all these biases, what can we do about it? And Kahneman's answer was not much. And I completely disagree. And, he's much more well-educated than I am. He's a much smarter guy. He's done the research. I'm not, calling him stupid in any way. But there are schools of thought that have worked on the suppression of the stimulus response. The idea that we don't have to respond. That's what mindfulness is. Mindfulness, when you're sitting and you're meditating and you're noting your thoughts, what happens through regular practice over long periods of time is the space between the thoughts widens. The space that lets you react differently is bigger. It's more spacious. You can make better decisions when you have the time, when you're not just automatically responding and reacting to things. So turns out, and I believe this, mindfulness is the solution to behavioral finance. It is the path to keep us from responding negatively to those scary things that happen out there. It is the way we begin to treat the volatility of the 529 plan and the risk that has to our children's education as something different than the saber-toothed tiger. So the first one is physiological, second one is psychological, third one is cultural. But it seems like you may have a question about the psychological piece.
Yeah, I mean, it's I love digressing on mindfulness, and it's a fair amount of what you and I will talk about today and how it relates to money. And I think it's much more than that, right? So mindfulness seems to be the answer to the behavioral finance, and it's probably a great answer to war, inequality.
Oh, of course.
Right. I mean, to me, the more I learn and the more I study if one thing is the answer for humanity, it's mindfulness. If we all meditate together, we all do metta together, the world will be a better. And so I just wanted to emphasize that, and then also point out what you were talking on. I often say that's what I'm spending most of my life working on, is simply increasing the gap between a stimulus and a response. And Viktor Frankl saying that, that's where the magic happens, because now we get to choose. We choose our emotion. We choose how we react to that emotion. We choose our response, right? So love that. Wanted to definitely emphasize that as you were there. And then I'll pass it back to you for culture, and then we'll jump all the way back to physiology, because there's so much to dive into here. I love it.
Yeah. So, but just before we do that, we started off talking about the difficulty of recovering those morning habits. And 4 months ago, I signed up for the Power of Awareness. And so I haven't been to a retreat for 20 years. The last retreat I was at was with my brother. It was after I went through a divorce a long time ago. And so after I went through my divorce, I spent a lot of time with my brother, and he kind of pulled me out. But we went to a Buddhist retreat in Santa Cruz 20 years ago. And so I noticed my meditation practice was falling apart, and my meditation practice was the anchors, the first thing I did in the morning. So I didn't exercise, I didn't stretch, I didn't do all the other things either. So I wanted to get that back. And I thought, what I'm going to do is I'm going to schedule a retreat. I'm going to go to a 5-day, 12-hour-a-day meditation retreat. And I sat there with Tara Brach, Jack Kornfield, Conda Mason, and Devin Berry every day for 5 days. And it was life-changing for me. It's been so long since I've had that kind of dedicated practice. And, we did, 15 minutes of meditation, 30 minutes of Dharma, 15 minutes of meditation for 12 hours a day. And it was wonderful. The very next day after it was over, I was able to sit again. I worked out again. So the beginnings of those habits came back, and I have the meditation is now solid. I'm now trying to meditate 3 times a day. And I'm trying to get it, I'm trying to boost it up to about 30 minutes 3 times a day. And if I can get it to an hour 3 times a day, I will. But there I have life. I have 2 kids here, so that's hard to accomplish. And I've already built into the schedule in October, another 7-day silent retreat. And so I'm making that commitment, and I'm right on board with you in terms of that's changing everything. That is rewiring my brain. And it's bringing it back around for me, which is pretty important. So.
And the one that you did that really got you back on track, was that Spirit Rock that you went to for that one?
It was actually, Jack's the founder, right? Jack Kornfield's the founder of Spirit Rock. And I think the Power of Awareness was originally filmed at Spirit Rock. This was live, but it was at a Silomar, and there's 250 people there. I don't know if Spirit Rock has that size of a venue like a Silomar does. And this is they recorded, it was so great to be part of it. If you think about the meditation teachers of old, in the US, there's the monks that have come over. There's the Tibetan monks that have come over. There's Chinese and Japanese monks that have come over, and they've trained a lot of, upper middle class white folk to be teachers in the realm of Buddhist studies in the United States. And you think about all the authors that I read, during my grad school program, all white, what Jack and Tara were doing intentionally was it looked to me, that no one stated this, but it looked to me like they were passing the baton. So Conda Mason and Devin Berry, Devin was my hero. He was incredible. I would subscribe to his newsletter in a heartbeat. Just a beautiful human being. But Conda Mason and Devin Berry brought their traditions. They're both Black. They brought their traditions in. They brought their experiences in. They expressed those experiences. And it seemed like Jack and Tara were kind of stepping away. Tara said this was the last live presentation she was ever going to do. Jack must be in his 70s now, right? So it looked like they were both slowing down and handing the baton to the next generation of teachers. And Conda's been doing it for 30 years, and Devin Berry's been doing it for 20 years as well. So it's not like they're young in this at all. But it's such a wonderful thing to be part of it. 4 great teachers, 5 great days, life-changing.
Well, that's amazing. And it just jumped out at me. I'm taking a training course, a teacher certification 2-year course that is Tara and Jack. And
you're in the MMTCP. I start in February, man.
Yes. So there you go. So yeah, I'm in year 2, just finished practicum 1. And, I just don't feel like I'm doing enough, and I'm not good enough. And I think that's, it's part of our illusions, right? So I've got to deepen my practice. And the one thing you nailed it, Jonathan, is at the start of COVID, I went on my first silent retreat before COVID, and I came back January 2020, I guess. Yeah. And I said to my wife, I have to do that every year. And then, 2 months later, not going anywhere for a silent retreat. But now that we're opening back up, it's I know it's the right thing to do for my family, for me, for work, for everything. To exactly what you said, maybe once a year, get away for a 1 week, just really dive deep. And then when you come home, it just strengthens the practice, strengthens that gap between stimulus and response. And that's when we make the right decisions, to your point about money, right? Because we're not being swayed by the illusion. So let's dive into the cultural impact, and then we'll dive back to talk about how we battle some of these things.
Yeah. So culture is interesting because it's not part of culture is our own internal psychological response to the stuff that's happening around us. So part of it is psychology, and let's just state that up front. But there's something special about investing in our culture specifically. And that is, there are rules, and just as an example, there are rules about what someone in financial services can say. There are fewer rules about what somebody in real estate can say. There's different rules for different investments. And that goes across everything, right? So there's some things that if I won an award for being a great advisor and I was at, let's call it Linsco Private Ledger, which is a independent broker dealer, I couldn't talk about that award. Like I wasn't able to tell people about this award. But if I was at, say, Morgan Stanley, I could talk about the award. So different places have different rules. Those rules end up allowing people to say different things. So the messages we get in our world, the marketed messages, are not consistent. The inconsistency creates a response of, I don't know what is right. I don't know what is accurate. And that's totally fine. That's totally normal. We should totally expect that. At the very same time, internally, we are very competitive. And then you layer social media on top of that competition. And suddenly, oh my God, we're terrible. Like I look at other people's social media feeds and I'm like, wow, I'm not doing very well. Like this guy is driving that. Look at the house, look at their vacations, their beautiful family. It's so easy to get caught up in that I'm not enough. I'm an imposter. Someone's going to find me out. All this psychology is just brewing underneath because of the competitive nature. Because financial services firms are marketing to us all the time, because the rules are different for different companies and different product systems and customers, clients, just normal people are just swimming in this culture of competition and marketing without any education, without any background in it. And it's not a fair fight. And there are people out there that are trying to educate folks. It's all available. Like there is Khan Academy, there is FINRA, SEC has lots of education on their website. There's lots of great stuff. But unless we seek it out, we never see it. And the stuff we see is marketing and competition. And that's the culture problem, is the competition. And it's constant marketing all the time.
And sorry, Jonathan, I lost a bit of that there. It's saying you're having an internet issue. It's still recording, but there was a couple gaps in there. And I'll mark that down for the sound editors to look at. What jumped out at me with that culture is that seems to be what's causing in young people. And I mean, I guess even all the way to my age, we're not that young anymore, is that I need to get rich quick, or I need to listen to these money gurus, even though in reality, a lot of these money gurus, they're renting the Lamborghinis. They're paying for 1 hour to take a photo inside a private jet that they probably will never fly on, right? And that in itself, before we get to the money guru and the get rich quick is an illusion, just the way they're presenting themselves, people don't even realize that's an actual illusion. So how do we overcome that illusion, and why are people so trapped by it? Why is it so easy to get stuck?
I'd go back to, the three collations, right? There's greed, hatred, and delusion. It's the I want, it's the I don't want, it's the I don't understand. One of the reasons, the reason I wrote the book was because I had begun putting these pieces together, and I just noticed that I want and what that makes me do, and I don't want and what that makes me do, and I don't understand and what that makes me do. And then if I sit down with a client, and I've noticed for years and years and years, and I explain something the way I think about it, they go, oh, I get that. That makes sense. We don't have to do anything right now. That's right. Okay, great. And then 2 months later, same conversation, same client. So it's like I have a coach of mine that calls it vitamin C. It's, vitamin C is something we have to take in, and then every day we flush it out. Like it comes in, it flushes out. It comes in, it flushes out. It doesn't stay in the system. So when we're thinking about that idea of greed, hatred, and delusion, and overcoming those things. So yeah, the three items are the greed, hatred, and delusion. And when you sit down with a client, you can over time, you can educate, you can talk, you can discuss, and it goes away. Like they'll hear it and then it goes away, and then they'll hear it and it goes away. And I think part of the reason it goes away is because I have studied and studied and studied and studied, and I've developed mindfulness, and they have heard it. They have understood it once, and they might have heard it and understood it again, but it's not something they constantly spend time on. And it's something I'm constantly spending time on. So there's a coaching benefit, but the thing that the thing that gets us is when we're looking at the person that's got taking the photos for that 1 hour inside the plane, or the person that's taking the photos of the car that they rented. The thing that gets us is the greed response. And it's very standard human, brain greed response. But if you don't recognize it as, oh, this is a greed response, or, oh, I'm wanting something. If you don't recognize that and catch it, and in the financial world, it's usually the opposite that gets us. It's usually the markets are down. I don't want that. That is scary. I'm terrified of that. I'm worried about that. And then sometimes it's a funny investment. It's Bitcoin, or it's SPACs or NFTs or something that's new, and it's huge upside potential, and you're so excited, and everyone should do it, and everyone's talking about it. It's all in the media, and so you start thinking, oh, everyone's making a lot of money here, and I'm jealous of that. I'm greedy. I want that. Is there something I'm wanting? And if you know what I'm wanting, then you can stop doing that. Underneath the greed and the hatred, underneath those delusions, or underneath those two is the idea of delusion, of not knowing. So there has to be a baseline of education, has to be a baseline of understanding. I'm going to compare this to the Buddhist literature. In the Buddhist literature, there's Buddha, there's Dharma, and there's Sangha, right? So the Buddha is the one who was successful. Dharma is the path to success, and Sangha is the culture that supports that success. In finance, when you're thinking about money or you're thinking about investing, there are lots of people out there that are successful. Those ones who are flashy with it, I would suggest aren't successful. They're trying to earn your eyes, but they may not be the most successful. Warren Buffett, very, very, very successful. Bill Gates, very, very, very successful. There's a lot of people that are very successful, and probably the wealthiest person is Elon Musk. So he's probably not a good example. But I think, there's outliers in every category, right? He's one of those people that is like to be really, really flashy. That's how he makes his money. And so, yes, he's wealthy, but he's also really flashy, not somebody you maybe want to follow. But this whole concept of understanding has to underlie the avoidance of the greed and the hatred, or the dislike. Hatred's such a rough word, but that's how the translation comes out of Sanskrit.
And so if you look at the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, and you tie that to our financial journey, right? So you're looking at people who've done it right and saying, hey, that's the Buddha of money. How do you tie in the Dharma and Sangha?
Yeah, the Dharma is I would say the Dharma is what they call evidence-based
financial literature.
It's planning and evidence-based. Yeah, it's the literature. It's the understood, academically supported process of financial planning and financial success. And it's out there, and it's available to everybody if you're willing to look for it. And then the Sangha is the community of people that come together to support each other in this process. Not in some instances, and this is where we talk about the three different tiers, right? The DIY support. In the DIY support, we sort of provide the process, and people do it themselves. In the done with you support, we work with folks, and we have, monthly conversations, in a group setting, and we answer questions, and people say, hey, I'm thinking about this. And I say, hey, that's maybe not a good idea because of this and this and this. And so it's an opportunity to kind of work together on things. One that when the cohort comes together, then you'll find other people, not me, other people in the cohort will say, hey, I tried that once and it didn't work. And that piece of education is helpful, but it's finding people with like minds, attempting to go in the same direction, attempting to help each other out. And they will keep each other from making those kinds of mistakes. And that's the Buddha Dharma Sangha as it applies.
And so when you look at that, it's almost your financial circle, right? So we usually say you are the sum of the 5 people you're closest to, or you'll often hear in money Twitter, your network is your net worth. And we're almost equating that to our financial Sangha. That's the people that are helping us make the right financial decisions, stick on the right financial path, not make too many big mistakes, and in a way, also teaching us. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. And when we think of that, one of the challenges we have is a lot of people will simply go with the flow on that, right? So they're not making deliberate choices. They're letting life guide them versus living a very deliberate plan. What's the biggest problem with that when it comes to our finances? And how do people create a plan for their future, starting with where they are now?
That second one, the second part of that is that's huge. That's a whole process. We'll get into that. But the first part is, remind me what the first part was.
Yeah, it's the idea of living by design versus by default.
Yeah, dangers of default. So there was this app. I don't remember what it's called, but there's this app that would take your face, take a photo of your face, and then age it 30 years. And I've seen this meme on Facebook recently where you've got two stick figures, one running towards the other one, and one says today you, one says future you. And then future you is in the next frame is running away with a bag of money over his shoulder. And present you is like, what's going on? And so there's this idea that if you live by default, if you just take it as it comes and you don't think about what the future you might need, you will spend all of your resources pleasing your present you. So there's two stages to this process that are important to separate. The first stage is there is a point in almost all of our lives where we don't have the resources to spend on building something for the future you. Those aren't people I'm necessarily talking to, because in time, those people will become this other group of people. You know, we all start off with an entry-level job, not making a lot of money. We all start off maybe paying for an education, working our way up the ladder, trying to get better incomes and trying to grow those. And that's fine. There's nothing wrong with being there. Keep researching, keep studying, keep learning new stuff, keep learning new skills, keep improving yourself, and keep getting better. And the income will improve. As your income improves, don't spend it all. As your income improves, start thinking about some of the very, very, very basics. Start thinking about saving. Start thinking about building an emergency fund. Start thinking about those next 2 or 3 things you're planning for. I'm going to take a vacation this summer. Rather than wait till the summer and put it on a credit card, let me save ahead for that thing. I'm going to buy a new car or buy a house. Let me not borrow all of it. Let me save up to make it more possible to get a better interest rate, all those kinds of things. Let me learn about debt before I borrow. Let me learn about credit repair before I borrow. Let me know these things before I take those steps and get into a hole. So those two different people, really important. I think there's a lot of millennials, a lot of young folks come out of college and saying, oh, I'll never make it. It's so bad. It's so terrible. And it's not saying it's easy. It's definitely hard, but there's a time frame between 22 and say 32 where lots going to change. Your income's going to go up. It's going to get better. You have to be patient with yourself and your skills and just one foot in front of the other, make it happen. And then once you get to that 32, maybe 35, oftentimes it's not until 45. And in many, many, many cases, it's often 50 where people start going, oh my God, I haven't planned. Thankfully, between 32 and 50, your income keeps going up. And so if wherever you recognize it, whenever you're on the cushion and you note your thought, whenever you note, oh my God, I should be planning for this, that's the time you're going to start. The earlier you start, the better. Time is definitely your friend. But wherever you are, that's where you are. There's no shame in that. Let's figure out from that point forward what we can do better. Once you figure it out, once you're awake to the idea that I'm not going to work forever, someday I'm going to have to rely on some kind of an income stream that comes from something other than my time spent, my work, my labor, then you have to start saving. You will recognize that we'll have to start saving. And then we have to start figuring out the 4 steps to the most important part of your plan is your retirement income plan. And that is, there's a moment you're not going to work. At that moment, what is your gap? What is all your fixed income? Maybe you got a pension. Very few people have that. Maybe you got Social Security. Most people have that. And then those things are less than your spending. The combination of those things is less than your spending. What is that gap? Is it $10,000 a year? Is it $100,000 a year? Is it $300,000 a year? What is the gap between your fixed income and your spending? And then you inflate that. What is that going to have to be for the next, am I 65? So 20 years, 25 years, 30 years. What's it going to have to be? And then you have to figure out what that asset base needs to be to provide that income. Then you got to figure out what kind of portfolio that asset base has to be in to provide that income. So there's 4 basic steps there. And I think about that retirement income plan as the thing you put in place first, because everything that you spend, whether that's for vacation, for a down payment on a house, for a new car, for kids' educations, you can do it. You'll have the money, but it'll come out of your future retirement income. So you have to know that that's the last place that you can trade away. You can work longer when you're 65. Your kids graduated from college 10 years ago, but you can work longer, and maybe you got to work forever. And I think that's one of the things that people are faced with, is having done no planning between 25 and 45 or 50. Now they're like, what do I do? Well, I'm going to have to work for the rest of my life. Trying to avoid that for as many people as we can.
So that's a lot for people to unpack. So let's work our way back and we'll weave our way through it, because I think that plan is really what the majority of people need to be understanding and need to be doing. And so the first thing we look at is we're looking ahead to our retirement and we're saying, what do we need? And there's two things that I think a person has to do there. One is to know what you're going to need. You need to know, well, what am I spending today? So what's my here? What am I spending right now? And then you're going to have to make a couple decisions. My income's going to go up over time. And when is enough going to be enough? Right? And so we talk about that as the idea of lifestyle creep. So if I'm going to keep getting raises, do I spend them, or do I start tucking every raise into the piggy bank to get to where I want to go? So step one, where am I at today? Is that where I want to be? Like, am I happy? Can I be happy on this income level? And then what am I going to do with my income along the way? Because that's going to help us establish, well, how are we going to achieve this goal, right? So how do you get someone that you're working with to nail down that, where am I at today? And what do I want when I'm retired?
So I think that there's, where am I today is actually not difficult. That's not true. Sometimes it is difficult. But if we look at, where I am today, that's like your profit and loss and your balance sheet, your personal income statement and your balance sheet. That's, every book on personal finance suggests, know what's your income, know what your expenses are, and then look at how that affects your balance sheet. If my income is greater than my expenses, my balance sheet is increasing. If my expenses are greater than my income, my balance sheet is decreasing. My net worth balance sheet is decreasing. So if you can be vulnerable with yourself, in the quiet of your own room, you can chronicle what you spend. Like I think it's pretty easy to look at your credit card statements and your checking account and the cash you pull out and figure out what you spent. And for most of us, what your income is, because that's every 2 weeks you get a paycheck, right? And so you can calculate that. Now it's unique if you're an entrepreneur and you've got, income that zigs and zags. Income goes up one month, you got great income, you sell, whatever, a painting, and the next month you don't sell anything, right? So that happens too. But let's just pretend for a second we're talking to somebody that has a regular income. So understanding that gap that is today, that should be something that anyone can accomplish. Pretty basic addition, subtraction math. Now, let's say that person's 45, right? And so then the next question is, how many years, let's say the gap is $40,000. How many years is it between the day we do that calculation and the day we need to draw a retirement income, right? So if it's $40,000 today and I'm 45 and I'm going to retire when I'm 60, that's 15 years. And it's going to be, expenses are going to be higher 15 years from now. We know that right now we're in a big spike of inflation. It's happening. Is it going to be this way forever? I don't know. Is it going to be what it was before this? I don't know. We don't know. You have to sort of guesstimate. You have to kind of take a fixed point and figure, hey, what this might be. Long-term average inflation rate's about 3.7%, right? Long-term. For the 20 years prior to 2022, it was more like 2.2%. So it was lower for a long period of time. So for high for a bit, we may actually end up at that average. If it's 3.7, by the way, lots of folks argue this point. What is long-term inflation? Some people say 2.5 is fine. Some people make it say 3.5. The way I think about it is the more you plan for inflation, if you plan for 3.5 instead of 2.5, you're being conservative. If you plan for 2.5 and it ends up being 3.5, your lifestyle expenses, the way you can live, the amount of money you have will be the same, but the amount of money the cost of the basket of goods will be higher, so your lifestyle will be lower. Hope that makes sense. So let's say it's 40 grand, it's 15 years, then it's either an online calculator or it's an Excel spreadsheet. You can say it's $40,000, year 1.035 times $40,000. Year 2, 1.035 times the result of $40,000 times 1.035. And you can kind of think about a spreadsheet that way. Lots of ways you can do this. We have a program where we help people through this process. It's actually, we have a cohort starting, I think, in October, where it's just we end up doing like a mindful retirement review, and we do this process with people. It's a sort of a 4 or 5 hour workshop. So that's the step. That's the first step. What's the gap? And then you have to inflate the gap to the date of retirement. Okay. The very next step. Let's say, and I'm not doing the math here. I could do the math, but it'd probably take me a couple seconds with my calculator. But let's not do the math. Let's just use some round numbers. So $40,000 is the gap today. Let's say 15 years from now, let's say it's $70,000. Let's say the gap in the future is 70 grand. If the gap in the future is $70,000, and there's lots of podcasts, lots of bloggers that talk about this, if the gap is 70,000, then there's a range. Again, this is a conservative versus aggressive of multiples of that 70,000 you need. So if you say, I'm going to use what they've termed the safe withdrawal rate, and then we will put a caveat on that. They call the safe withdrawal rate 4%. And there's research behind it. 4% is a pretty well-known number. Lots of arguments for and against 4%. Some arguments say it could be a little bit higher. Some arguments say it could be a little bit lower. 4% is a pretty good starting point. So 4% is it's 25. It's 1/25 of 100, right? Is 4%. So if you multiply 70,000 times 25, that's the asset base you need to spin off that $70,000, growing with inflation for the rest of your life.
And so I'll just let the readers know. So what we're saying there, safe withdrawal rate, the concept is that if you have an asset base, you can draw down, if you think about taking out cash equal to 4% of that asset base, and you ought to be able to draw that down into perpetuity. So where, Jonathan, I'm sure you'll say some of the challenges that are coming out to the withdrawal rate, one of them is probably going to be inflation. Another is simply that our lifespans are getting longer and longer. So will you outlive the tests that have been run over the last 20, 30 years? Do you want to talk a little bit about that, or okay, over to you?
Yeah, that's precisely the reason that those are the arguments about the 4%. So what I say is 4% is a good starting point. And if you think about how that 4% works in a 60-40 or 60% equity, 40%, this is terrible once you start talking about it, because there's so many little details that have to come in, sort of explain each little piece. So when you think about a 4% withdrawal rate that grows as your cost of living increases, that means the asset base has to continue to grow in addition to that 4% withdrawal. So you're assuming a 6 or 7% return if you're drawing a 4% distribution. Okay. So if you're assuming 6 or 7%, how do you get that? Well, that's a 60 or 70% equity portfolio. And that's, if you want that return, you got to deal with that volatility. And, perhaps in another conversation, we could talk about expected volatility on that kind of portfolio, but that gets way too far into the weeds. So if that 4% is our starting point, and we're assuming 6 or 7% return on that, then what we could do is say, you know what, I'm going to assume the same return, but I'm only going to draw 3.5%. Now, if I only draw 3.5%, what that's doing is it's letting more of the assets stick inside the portfolio and grow, so that at the far end, at the end of my life, when I'm 85 and expecting a return, the probability of my being able to draw that same income, that 3.5% of the then portfolio value, increases. So there's a point between, as you go down from 4 to 3.9 to 3.7 to 3.5 to say 3.2, as you decline in the percentage you're withdrawing from your portfolio, the probability of success approaches 99 to 100%. It can never be guaranteed, because markets are always there. Markets can hand us something we've never seen before. It can't be guaranteed, but it approaches 99% certainty of being successful the lower your distribution rate is. And so for someone who's really, really, really concerned and doesn't want to take the risk in the stock market, what you end up doing is saying, what I'm going to do is reduce my withdrawal rate. The math is the same math, right? You're taking at the same amount of money, growing at the same inflation rate for the rest of your life. But if you anticipate a lower return, you have to start with more money for it to last. Right? This is an income stream that rises to meet your rising cost of living isn't a nice to have. It's a must have. This isn't, if you're really planning this out, there isn't a choice here, right? If your income stream doesn't rise to meet your rising cost of living, then your lifestyle is in decline. The minute you're drawing from principle, your lifestyle is in decline, and there isn't a way to protect that. So the wonderful positive of getting this done correctly is when you die, if your portfolio is growing 6% per year and you're withdrawing 4% per year, the moment you die is the moment you have the maximum assets of your entire life. And so you can leave something to children, charity, church, whatever it is that's important to you, you can leave the legacy behind. And that's, for me, that's the ideal scenario. That's the scenario I'm trying to build for my family.
Yeah, you build it so that it just always grows, right? And we'll talk a bit about that as we talk about how to invest, because really we're talking about passive income that's growing in the background. And for our listeners who maybe didn't punch that into the calculator, if you realize that what you need in retirement is $70,000 a year, at the 4% withdrawal rate, that would be $1.75 million. At the 3.5% withdrawal rate, it would be $2 million. So you can see that being a little more conservative requires a $250,000 difference in your investment balance. So now, Jonathan, we've calculated the number. Let's say, someone's sitting in front of you and you say, okay, well, you've done the math. You went home, you realized you need $70,000 a year. That's what you spend. That's your spending. And you're going to be happy with that lifestyle. So that's your number. And we know you need somewhere between $1.75 and $2 million to be able to handle that. And they're 45 and they look at you and say, Jonathan, there's no way I can do that. So now it's reconciliation time, right? Because you're saying, well, I don't think I can get there. And so I think there's probably 2 or 3, maybe 4 different things we can do, right? We can say, well, I've got to lower my spending because I can't get to 70,000, or I've got to increase my income so that I can save more, or I have to re-examine what my investment strategy is, I guess, or I've got to retire later than I intended to. I mean, those are the 4 that jump out at me.
In practice, the first one people pick is, well, let's just make more money. And the reality is that one is not predictable enough to control. That's not one we control. Over a 30-year period, again, dealing with physiology, psychology, and culture, it's very difficult. You can increase your equity exposure by maybe 10%. Over, sort of a recommended asset allocation for one person's risk tolerance. You can maybe increase your equity percentage by 10%. But if you do it more, what'll happen is markets will decline. It'll decline more than you expect. You'll freak out and you'll sell, right? And that'll be the worst possible thing. You will have destroyed your plan. So you don't want to do that too much. You don't want to play with the equity percentage too much. So the thing that actually ends up working in practice more often is if someone's 45 and wants to retire when they're 60, they end up retiring when they're 65. And the biggest bang for your buck comes from, not drawing from that portfolio that soon and instead continuing to earn. And so there's 2 different stages to this, right? Let's say instead of retiring at 65, I keep working for 5 additional years. That means 5 more years of contributions and 5 fewer years of distributions. Okay. That's a huge swing in assets over time. And then the second stage is, well, at 65, I'm not going to do the same job, but I'm going to do something else that, I've got clients who are builders and they're builders their entire careers. I love this guy's story. He had this massive garden in his backyard. He had a third of an acre, and he committed the entire thing to raspberries. And he loved growing raspberries. Every weekend he'd be in the raspberry garden and growing raspberries. And he had quarts and quarts, and he made ice cream and raspberry pies, and he made raspberry cakes and raspberry. He just made so much stuff out of these raspberries. He sold raspberries at the farmer's market. He loved raspberries and he grew raspberries. He loved them. So he actually quit his building job and he decided, you know what I'm going to do is I'm going to grow raspberries and just do this full time. And he had a farm. He named the farm. He didn't make much money, but maybe he made $15,000 a year, $1,000 a month, plus a little extra change to go around. And what that meant was he met some of his expenses and he drew less off of his portfolio for 5 more years, which gave him 5 years of reduced withdrawals, which means that money lasts much longer as it continues to grow. If it's a 1% withdrawal for 5 years, that's way better than a 4% withdrawal for that first 4 or 5 years. And that's the highest probability way to improve the long-term outcome is to work a little bit longer. You're also, the other two things you suggested are you can save more today. You can spend less today, save more today, or you can reduce that 70 to 60 when you retire. And both of those things are fine. There's things that are possible, but people don't like that. People generally, when given the choice, would prefer to live their lives the way they've lived them and just work a little bit longer. That's in my experience.
And what percentage get to that reconciliation exercise and simply say, I can't do it. And so they give up.
So my sample set is not good for that question. I mean, my sample set is clients who have sought out, they've asked their friends for referral, their friends have referred them to me, right? They've sought out somebody to help them with this financial planning process. I don't have a lot of experience of people saying, I can't get there. I don't know. They're not in my world. I worked with a lot of younger people that are, cooking in a kitchen when I first worked with them, but they're young. Like they've got a lot of time in front of them. I've worked with people who were teachers. Teachers don't make a lot of money, but they usually have a pension. I worked with people that own small retail stores, in the Bay Area and made $115,000, right? So you can, with a little bit of thinking, with a little bit of saving, a little bit of time, a little bit of effort, you can figure it out. And the reality is we don't have a choice. We have to, if we don't make these choices intentionally, these choices get made for us. And that's the thing that's the scariest. I mean, what probably the folks that I've worked with that were the most poorly off, what they ended up doing was they downsized their house. They ended up living in a trailer. No shame in that. That's what they could afford. My grandma and grandpa lived in a trailer home for many, many years before my grandfather died. But we do what we have to do. Better to know what you have to do earlier than wait and find out too late and not being able to adjust at that point.
And so that's a big part of this puzzle is that the earlier we start, and we all hear it from the financial planners and the charts they give us, but the earlier we start, the more we have the ability to make the choices ourselves versus having the choices made for us. And so if we look at someone who now we've told them the plan, right? So they know their number, they know where they need to get to, and then we say, okay, now we have to create the financial plan, right? And I like how you had the 8-fold path of financial planning. I'm wondering if we could dive into some of the earlier steps that people need to take. We'll leave some of them for them to read in the book, but some of the earlier steps that you talk about, whether it's personal values, knowing what our meaningful purpose is, our perfect life, our mission statement, and what should people be thinking about as they go through that?
I think you just laid out the first real core step is to figure out your foundation, your values, your purpose, your goals. And that's, if you don't know what you're investing for, you can't know how to invest, right? So the definition of investing is putting things aside today for use tomorrow. So what is that? What is the use tomorrow? What is the time it's needed? How much is needed at that time? You have to know that before you know how you're going to invest it. And we've got a course, the Values, Purpose, and Goals course that's free. And it's something I used to do every year. I've done it for so many years. I don't do it as often now. I probably should revisit it more often than I do. But it's there. Anyone can take it. It's free. I'm happy to give you guys a link for it easily enough. After that, there's 2 really key steps that I think are prerequisites to investing. The first is 3, actually. The first is you have to have the habit of savings. You have to have the habit of every single time you get some money, paycheck, you sell something, whatever, some of that 5%, 10%, 20%, you read some of these fire blogs, 40%. Some chunk of it is committed to saving. First step, habit of saving. Second step, emergency fund. So many times, this conversation, it happens so often. Jonathan, cash isn't paying anything. I don't want to put money in the bank. It's not, I need to invest it. And I say, no. This isn't return money. This is emergency money. This is the money that you can get to on a day like today when markets are off 20%. You shouldn't be selling the stuff that you have invested. Like, you need to have cash on the sidelines. And that cash, that emergency fund, has a different flavor if you're 25 than if you're 60. Emergency fund at 25, you need, 2 months, 3 months of your income or of your expenses saved. When you're 60, you should be building up to a 2-year, this is my cash on the sideline just in case markets go down and I'm drawing on my portfolios, right? So you need to go from that 3 months to 2 years of cash in that 40-year period between 25 and 65. So that's thing 1, habit of savings. Thing 2, emergency fund. Thing 3 is get rid of all bad debt. And bad debt is non-deductible debt. It's high interest debt. It's credit card debt. It's no debt. To the extent possible, no debt. The only debt that I look at that's possible to carry into retirement is your home ownership debt. Better if you don't, but home ownership debt, I think that's just fine. You just got to make sure it fits into your cash flow. And if I refinanced my house in November of 2020, I got the lowest rate I think has ever been printed on a mortgage. I think I got 1.875% on my mortgage. Today, that's not possible, but hopefully in the future, people will be able to refinance and things will come down. So those are the 3 things. Those are prerequisites.
Let's dive into the 3 of these. So we'll start with habit of savings. So I often write that financial independence, going back to what we talked about at the start of the conversation, it's actually quite simple, not necessarily easy. Earn more, spend less, invest the rest, right? And so when you talk about that habit of savings, what are some of the things that people should be doing? I know one of the ones you like is pay a visit to your future self and have a conversation. What does that look like? And what are some of the other things that, it's a little harder when we're talking to that person who's 45, but when you're talking to that person in their teens or their 20s, what are some of the things you share with them that they should be thinking about for a habit of savings?
So my go-to, I actually wrote an article about this. I think it was in Business Insider a long time ago. When you're young, it's actually the young folks that you have to convince. At 45, at 45, your knee already hurts a little bit. You already know that I had a surgery on my knee by the time I was 45. So I already knew that I'm not going to work forever. I knew that there was a point where I would be no longer indestructible. So when folks are young, it's harder to convince them to save money. It's also, they don't have as much money to save. But I talk about, the benefit, and you've seen this chart. I think Vanguard has this chart on their website. I've seen this chart many times. If you put $200 a month in for 10 years, from 25 to 35, you'll have more money than if you put in $200 a month starting at 35 for the rest of your life, right? So it's time in is way more important than timing. The reason, I've seen this article 3 or 4 times now, the reason Warren Buffett is as rich as Warren Buffett is, almost all his money was made after his 75th birthday because it's compounding. It's compounding at ridiculous amounts now. So getting that thing started and getting the compounding started, man, your life is way easier if you get the compounded starting really, really early. That is one of the fundamental failures of our education system is people do not come out understanding how compounding works. And that is so bad. That's one thing that if people learned in middle school, how does compounding work? And that was drilled into them and they understood how compounding worked in terms of investing, in terms of their money, they would be more interested in putting that money aside for sure. As people get older, yeah, they know they need to save. It's just a matter of valuing my future self's goals as highly as my present self's goals. And that's a tough one, separating those 2 things out. And frankly, I don't convince. I'm not trying to sell you on this idea. This is a fact. This isn't something I have to prove. It's a fact. You will need income when you retire. The only way you can have that income when you retire is if you saved while you're working.
Or you don't get to retire.
Yeah, or you don't retire.
Or you do, but you don't live the life you want. Your future self is sacrificed for your current self. So you can either choose to sacrifice a little now for a good future, or in fully enjoy now, and we can debate whether you're fully enjoying it or whether it's excess, and then down the road you're not enjoying it. That's when you're sacrificing. So that's where that conversation with future self comes in, is saying, hey, how do we want to equalize this journey between the two of us? You now, me later. How do we play that game together?
Yeah, if you really think about this, what my dad said, this is what my dad taught me this when I was probably 15, 16 years old. Jonathan, save 10% of everything forever. And that, I didn't do the math on this when I was that age, but they made me save 10% of everything that I ever made. And so that became a habit. And if starting at 15, you save 10% of everything, that's kind of like, if you don't do that and you start at 45, you're going to save 20% of everything to get to the same place, right? So much easier to build the habit younger, so much easier. And it's a smaller percentage for the rest of your life if you start it earlier. So there are multiple advantages to starting earlier. It's easier long term. It's a simpler path long term. You don't get to go out one night a week with your friends. I don't know. That trade-off might be worth it if you explain that.
Yeah, and what people may not realize with the power of compounding is, if we look at an annual historical return rate of around 8%, that means that our money is doubling every 9 years. And so that $10 or 10% I put in becomes 20 simply through the passage of time. And then it doubles again. So now when I'm 20 years, and that for people is why that exercise of, well, if you start when you're 20 and you go to your 30, it's better than 30 for the rest of your life, because it's doubled so many times. You can't catch up to it by putting more money in. And so, okay, let's go to emergency fund. So why all cash? And for people who don't even know what an emergency fund is, like, what are some of the things they should be putting into their mind bank so that they are ready?
So why all cash, and what's there to know about emergency funds? So the only thing that is sort of universally available, universally accessible, universally valuable is cash. That's the thing we use to shop at the store. Like that is what we need when we need money to spend. We need cash. So the things that qualify as your emergency fund are a savings account, maybe a money market savings account, maybe half savings, money market savings, and half CDs, that mature in a near term, not that mature in 5 years. Emergency fund is the stuff that's accessible, it's liquid, it's spendable today if you need it. And when you're 25, tires on the car, I get a flat, I got to replace, you don't have a lot of income. I could put on a credit card, or if I had an emergency fund, I use the emergency fund, right? It just makes things accessible. When I was 38, I had a tree fall in my backyard and land on the house, right? Land on the porch roof, and that we have a $5,000 deductible. Well, the deductible came out of the emergency fund, right? Then I had to refill the emergency fund. Thankfully, I didn't have to have the whole thing come out of the emergency fund. I didn't, that's a lot of damage when a tree falls on your house. But I had enough for that deductible. So it's got to be liquid. It's got to be available. Some people will say Bitcoin's liquid, but it's not really. And some people say that it's not a store of value. Like, it's not a very good store of value. That's not your emergency fund. Gold, also not a good store of value, not your emergency fund. Stocks, bonds, they're volatile. They zig and they zag. Rates go up, bond values go down. Stocks go zig and zagging all the time. They're not reliable as a source of emergency fund. So yeah, it's got to be cash.
And then if you some people use their line of credit, but at the end of the day, if things get ugly, banks don't let you draw on your lines of credit.
Yeah, imagine 2008, and a lot of folks going into 2007, 2008, and the Great Recession said, "Yeah, I don't need cash. I've got my home equity line of credit." And then the bank said, "Sorry, you can't use your home equity line of credit." And it had nothing to do with their credit; it had to do with the bank's credit. So it's, if you don't have access to it, if you don't control it, if it's not in your name, they can take it from you.
Yeah, that's such a good point. So, and then that brings us to debt. We're talking about lines of credit. So debt, we want to get rid of bad debt, and there's two things to think about. The financial, and then also the psychological, right? And part of what that ties to me, I don't know if you use the terms, a lot of people when they're teaching people how to pay off debt, they're saying, hey, there's the avalanche method and there's the snowball method. Are those two that you use with your clients? And do you want to bring our listeners up to speed on the difference in how they tie to psychology versus financial?
Yeah, you know what? I get them both. I don't remember which is which. I mean, I always recommend, pay off one of the highest interest first. I get paying off the smaller one, and then that, I think that's the avalanche. It goes over to the other one, but it's the interest rate that matters, and interest rate is an expense that occurs every year. You're better off paying off the high interest one first. Now, the caveat is if you have a small one, like if you got $50 on a 20% card, yeah, you pay that one off. But if you have $50 on a 5% card and $1,000 on, a 20% card, just for convenience sake, I could see how you'd pay off that smaller one, even though it is a smaller percentage, just to make it simpler. I am to the point now where I don't like having multiple accounts. I like having one checking. I like having one savings. I like having one mortgage. I'm just trying to keep it simple at this point. And I think that the cycles that I save worrying about where stuff is are worth way more than additional interest or financing at a lower rate or whatever. It's not worth it for me to think about that. But in some cases, yeah, people will want to say, I've got 4 credit cards. I'm going to consolidate these 3 to this one because it's a 0% rate. And they'll do that until they can pay it off. And that's a game. And I've seen people play that game. And that game can end really well. It can also end very, very poorly. It's better to not dig that hole to begin with, obviously. But if you do dig the hole, there are tools you can find. There's debt management services, there's consolidation services, there's worst case scenario, there's attorneys that still know how to do bankruptcy, right? Those things are still possible. It's harder today, but it's still possible.
Yeah. And so we've dove pretty deep. We started with the basics. We went through the illusions. Then we got to the financial planning, but we skipped right over the middle section, a fair amount of it, which is how we define our happiness, right? Because part of what we want to think about as we get to the financial planning and we're planning for retirement is, well, what's really going to make me happy? Because part of what you realize, and I think it helps with the financial journey, is that you don't need all the money. The money is not, people who say, well, money doesn't buy happiness. Yes, it doesn't buy happiness. And it makes the other things easier. So, I'm not going to tell people who are listening that money doesn't smooth over some of the bumps. Now, but it is not the determinant of being happy. Do you want to share some of the things that people should be thinking about in terms of happiness so that they look forward? Because we want them not only planning their financial future, but let's call it their happy future as well, right?
Yeah. Life planning, not financial planning.
Yeah, beautiful way to put it.
So there's 2 things. I mean, there's 8 pillars, but there's 2 things that will determine your lifetime happiness. Those 2 things are health and relationships. So when you think about, and all the other things are important, the accountability, the gratitude, the generosity, all those things are important. But the 2 things that will make up the bulk of your lifetime happiness is the relationships you have with people, family, friends, and your health. So 2 things to make the core of your spending. Health, which means nice pair of walking shoes, right? Because you can go for a walk, that'll help your health, and you can go for a walk with another person. That's that's relationship and health all wrapped up in one. And that's not very expensive. $100 every 6 months, right? That's pretty cheap. You can get a lot of mileage on that. No pun intended. The other things about health, go see the doctor. If you have something that's bugging you, don't put it off. Those things explode. They become bigger than they need to. Go see the doctor. Don't be afraid of that. Today, we have healthcare that enables that. HMOs everywhere. We all have it. It's less expensive for some. It's more expensive for others. The people it's less expensive for actually needed to be less expensive. The system we have in place is actually okay at this point. So go see a doctor if you need to, even if it costs you $50. Don't, because $50 today is going to save you a bunch of money tomorrow. Relationships, and this is gonna get me again. So during COVID, actually even before COVID, this happens to everyone as we age. Like, I know a lot of people. I was the chairman of the Chamber of Commerce for a long time in Berkeley, California. I was on multiple boards. I have clients. I'm deeply involved in my community. I know a lot of people. But knowing a lot of people took a lot of time, which means my inner circle declined leading up to COVID. As I was working hard and I was busy and the kids were young and we're driving them everywhere. And so my inner circle declined from probably, 6 or 7 really close friends to probably 2 or 3 really close friends. And then COVID hit. And then that circle, we didn't see anybody. The only person I saw was my brother. So that circle declined to 1. I had 1 very close friend that I saw on a regular basis, my brother, and then he died. So I've spent the last year, in addition to trying to figure out my habits, rebuilding friendships. Now, it's really interesting because I know how to meet people. I know how to talk to people. I'm good at that. But everyone wants to talk, two pieces. I'm not very good at asking for help. And every time I call somebody, the first question is, how you doing? I realize your brother, blah, blah, all this stuff. And I'm not good at asking for help. And everything sounds like an ask for help. And so I have a hard time reaching out to somebody and saying, hey, let's go grab coffee or whatever. I still forced myself and I still did it. And I have that friend group is growing again. I've touched base and reconnected with some of the older friends. And so, but coffee, dinner, a hike, these things don't cost a lot of money. And those relationships are the things that are going to mean everything as we age. And it's very simple to let that friend circle decline. And we all do. The research says we have 5, and then we have 4, and then we have 2, and then we have 1, and then they die. That's what the research says. So as we're 80, our circle goes way down. And then my father lost his best friend in the world and business partner probably 8 years ago. He lost another friend probably 3 years ago. He basically does puzzles now. He's 81, and it's crushing. My wife and I were talking about my dad's sadness last night, and it's, if you're lucky enough to be healthy, you will outlive many of your peers. And that's tragic and it's hard, but still in a lifetime of happiness today, tomorrow, when you're 85, those 2 things are the places you want to focus most of your effort and energy on, and make sure you have time, make sure you have resources for those 2 things.
A couple things I'll add to that, because those were wonderful, and 2 of the biggest drivers of health for sure, or happiness for sure, is, you highlighted yourself as not good at asking for help. But I think it's always very important to emphasize on the podcast is that's men in general, right? Is one of our traits is we suffer in silence. And so it tends to be why men have higher rates of depression, alcoholism, drug use, suicide, is we don't ask for help. And so for men who are listening, always be willing to reach out to your friends, whether it's in person, online. There's always people to talk to. You can find me online in a number of ways, and there's more people like me. But don't do that suffering in silence, because it's not a good place to be. And there's always people willing to listen. And so if you're having trouble there, reach out to some of those avenues that are available for you. And Men's Circle is a great one. I did that for a couple of years. Highly recommend it for people who've never done it. And I thought you'd appreciate one quote, because when you were talking about health, it always makes me think of that Dalai Lama quote where he says, he was asked what surprised him most about humankind. And he answered, man, because he sacrifices his health in order to make money. Then he sacrifices money to recuperate his health. And so, we're talking about financial planning, but also life planning. And so your health is so important. Don't sacrifice it in the pursuit of money, because in the end, I'm in my mid 40s, Jonathan. You said that's when you got your knee replaced, and the body starts to break down, and it starts to break down more when you sacrificed it for financial attainment or goals, right?
Yeah, probably the most quoted story in my book was, I think this is 2000. Eli was 2, so this is 2005. I had been on those Wall Street firms for a bunch of years. I had broken away from the Wall Street firms and started my own company. And I basically worked, ridiculous hours, ate crappy food, drank a lot until for the 2 years after I started my company. And I weighed 290 pounds. And I couldn't touch my knees, much less my toes. No fitness, can't walk upstairs, just really, really in bad shape. And again, this isn't I feel for people who are in situations where they are overweight and they have challenges. I'm not as bad as many. I was, further gone than some, but I caught it when I was young. I caught it 20 years ago, and I was able to turn it around. But it was very hard. It was very hard at 30. If I didn't turn around, I can't imagine the dedication it would take at 50 to do it. I just can't even fathom, losing 70 pounds as a 50-year-old. I would throw in the towel. I would give up. There's just no way. So if you have it, keep it. Take care of your body. Don't work too hard. Alcohol is horrible. Alcohol is a terrible substance. And I'm somebody that I went deep during the COVID. Like I drank way more than I should have. I've been on calls with clients, across the country calls, and I'm like, how you doing? Oh, we're drinking, they're drinking. Everyone's, everyone was talking about how bad they did it. I was definitely one of them, but, trying to get under control again.
Yeah. I made the decision 2 months ago to just stop. And it was, you nailed it, right? Is a lot of us, I almost look at 2020, COVID started, and it was, I'm going to live my best life. And I never been in better shape, right? And then 2020 rolled around, and I know for you there was tragedy in 2021, but when it rolled around, I think a lot of people had been so buried for so long that it just went, all of a sudden it went from I'm going to live my best life to I'm going to consume alcohol at a rate that I've never touched it in my life. And rolling into 2022, you start to ask yourself, well, wait a second, is this who I'm becoming, or am I going to make a choice that this is who I'll never be? And that was, to your point, it's crazy. It's the exact same thing. And 2 months ago, I said, no, that can't be in my life. At least for the next year, it's got to be out completely. And, I don't even want to give myself that leeway. It's out. So great call, Jonathan.
Good on you.
Well, we'll see.
I'm not quite there.
I've made that call before, 10 months, and then we reintroduced it, much to my chagrin. So we covered, we meandered, but we covered a fair amount of the book. And for people who are listening, and we're talking about happiness and how to pursue it in your life, we're talking about different illusions that you have to break away from in order to have a healthy relationship with money. And we talked about your financial plan, and Jonathan has an eightfold path to your financial health. And I love that because we have the eightfold path to Buddhism. So I was really happy when I read that. So Jonathan, is there anything that we missed that you really want to nail down for people in the conversation?
There's one piece, there's one thing that I think it bears being very clear about, because I think there's a lot of the noise in the financial world is about investing, and simpler is better. Fewer decisions is better. People talk about automating their expenses. You can automate your portfolio. I talk about in the book, I talk about, a growth portfolio is 80% equities and 20% fixed income. And when I say 80% equities, I mean an 80% all country world index. It's the entire global equity market. I'm not saying we should try to figure out how much we should have in the US and how much we should have in international, how much we should have in emerging. I'm not saying how much we should have in technology, how much we should have in energy. I'm not saying that kind of stuff at all, because no one knows. No one can predict that. That's impossible. The best thing you can do, and this is, this Warren Buffett says something to this effect, 90% in the S&P 500, 10% in cash. He just says, use an index. I wouldn't use just a US index myself. I would use an international global index, but don't overthink this. Everyone's selling their book. Everyone that says they know what's going to happen next, they're selling something. You don't need to overthink investing. Keep it simple, few transactions. It comes down to asset allocation, diversification, and rebalancing. It does not have anything to do with security selection or market timing. If you're doing security selection and market timing, you will eventually have your head handed to you. Eventually you will lose, and you will lose big when it happens. Asset allocation, diversification, rebalancing. Only three things you have to think about. And
then the only thing to have that as the path we take, all we have to do is recognize that in the fullness of time, we believe in humanity and the market goes up, right? We don't have to expect anything crazy, just the age-old saying, up and to the right. And in the fullness of time, that's where it's going. I love that. Great spot to end. Keep it simple. Don't overcomplicate your life. Don't overcomplicate your investing. Jonathan, where can our listeners find you?
So the main place to find me is at mindful.money. In the upper right-hand corner of mindful.money, you will see all of my social media where you can find me there. There you also find the Mindful Money podcast. You can also find me on the Mindful Wealth podcast, which is in a different place. All our courses are there, but I'm at mindful.money. Everything about me, mindful.money.
Perfect. Thank you. And so we'll end it there. And I really appreciated having a conversation with you today.
Clint, I'm very happy to have been here. Very happy to find a future MMTCP partner as well.
Thank you for joining us on The Pursuit of Learning. Make sure to hit the subscribe button and head over to our website, thepursuitoflearning.com, where you will find our show notes, transcripts, and more. If you like what you see, sign up for our mailing list. Until next time, your host in learning, Clint Murphy.